Hello and welcome back to Free Code Tutor. Again, today we are going to understand the updating lifecycle methods. Methods that are called when a component is being re-rendered because of changes to either props or state. Again, we will be going through them in the order that they are invoked. We have a total of 5 methods, but out of the 5, 3 fall into the category of rarely used methods. We will, however, go through all 5 of them. The first method is a method we are now familiar with. Static get derived state from props. This is a static method which receives props and state as its parameter and has to return either null or an object that represents the updated state or of the component. This method is called every time a component is re-rendered. This method is used when the state depends on the props of the component. And again, do not cause any side effect like HTTP request or AJAX call. This method is a rarely used method in updating phase. The second method in the updating phase is the should component update method. This method receives the updated props and state, and the purpose of this method is clear from its name. It dictates if at all the component should re-render or not. By default, all class components will re-render whenever the props they receive or the state changes. This method can prevent that default behavior by returning false. What you can do in this method is compare the existing props and state values with the next props and state values and return true or false to let React know whether the component should update or not. This method is basically for performance optimization. And again, do not cause any side effect like HTTP request calling the setState method. This lifecycle method again is classified as a rarely used lifecycle method in the official React documentation. The third method is the all too familiar render method. It's the only required method. We read this prop and this dot state and return the JSX. Do not change state or interact with DOM or make AJAX calls, which describes the UI. Avoid changing the state or interacting with the DOM in the render method. The fourth method is called getSnapshot before update. This method accepts previous props and previous state as its parameter and is called right before the changes from the virtual DOM are to be reflected in the DOM. This again is a method React documentation classifies as a rarely used method. You would use this method to capture some information from the DOM. For example, you can read the user scroll position and after the update maintain that scroll position by performing some calculations. This method will either return null or return a value. The return value will be passed as the third parameter to the next method. GetSnapshot before update used to read the current DOM state and returns a value or null. The final method in the update lifecycle is component.update. This method will be called after the render is finished in the re-render cycles. This means that you can be sure that the component and all its subcomponents have properly rendered itself after the update. This method accepts 3 parameters: previous props, previous state and the snapshot value returned from the snapshot before update method. This method is guaranteed to be called only once in each re-render cycle. So what you can do is cause side effects. That is, you can make Ajax calls, but before making the call you need to compare the previous props with the new props and then decide whether to make the Ajax call or not. If you are not comparing, you are making unwanted request, which is not really a good idea. So component did update called once after the component has re-rendered and they suitable to make Ajax calls based on the previous and current props value. Alright, we have now understand the theoretically version of this updating lifecycle methods in React. Now we should get into our code, and I'm going to use that lifecycle A and lifecycle B component for this updating lifecycle methods. So first of all, we have already called the static get derived state from props method that has been called from our previous class, and now I'll call the second method, which is should component update method. I'll call it right after this component did mount. So should component update, and then inside this function I will console log this function name console.log. Again, let's mention the name of the component. So lifecycle A space the name of this method, and do not forget to return some value. So in this case I'll return true, like this. And the third method is already called, which is render method. So I'm going to call the next method, which is fourth method, and the name of this method is get snapshot before update. So get snapshot before update, and then inside this method we're having two parameter or two arguments, that is previous props and previous state. And inside this function, let's console.log this method's name console.log, and again I'm going to have this method name with the component name. So lifecycle A space the method name, and do not forget to return a value. So in this case I am returning null, like this. And the final method is component did update. So I'm going to call right after this method component did update, and inside this method again I'm going to have the same console.log, only to change the method name, like this. Alright, so we are done with component or the component A or the lifecycle A component. Now we will move inside this lifecycle B, and I will call the same methods inside this lifecycle B component. So component did updates, get snapshot before update, and should component update. So as you can see, the two methods are already being called inside component B or lifecycle B component, which is static get derived state from props and the render method. Now I'll paste these three other methods, new methods, and I'll simply change the name of this lifecycle A to lifecycle B. Now to make sure this component did mount or this should component update to be triggered, I will create one method over here with the help of a button. So I'll create a button over here, and I'll have an onClick function, and this will call a handler. So this dot change state, Now I will write this method over here. Change state is an arrow function, and inside this function I'm going to change the state. So this dot set state name equals to something like let it be my name for the moment. So we are creating this function because we want to trigger the update of lifecycle B component, and for that there is a need of a change either in the props or in the state. So that's why we have written this method or this change state function in lifecycle A component, so that we can call the other three updated method from lifecycle B. Now let's get back to our browser and see how this is working. Now if I open the console.log or the console, now from the now as you can see, these methods are called from the previous rendering, or I mean without any change through this UI. So these are calling like previous we have in like previous class we have seen these methods how these are being rendered. Now I'll clear this console log and I'll click on this button. Now from this you can understand it has called the lifecycle A methods from get derived state from props, then should component update, and after that render. I'll make it a little bigger over here, and after render it moves to the lifecycle B, which is the child component, and it also called the other methods like get derived state from props, and then should component update, and then render, and after rendering it has called the get snapshot before update, and then it moves to the lifecycle A and call the same method from lifecycle A get snapshot before update, and then it called the component did update from lifecycle B, and then it returns to lifecycle A and it's called the component did update from lifecycle A. So render and component did update method are more commonly used method, that is in this lifecycle updating methods. Alright, so that is all about component updating lifecycle method.